Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode in the Cyber Leadership Launchpad Mentoring Series, brought to you by the Global Cybersecurity Forum. My name is Rebecca McLaughlin-Eastham, and I'm delighted to be your host for these important conversations with pioneering women transforming sectors and societies as they share powerful lessons in leadership and lasting legacy. Today, my very special guest is Her Excellency Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović. As former president of Croatia and a senior NATO leader, she has operated at the heart of global security and diplomacy, from navigating complex global security challenges to shaping strategic communications at scale. Her career spans some of the most critical arenas of modern statecraft. In this conversation, we explore the realities of leadership, from strategic empathy and the pressures of high office to the evolving nature of cyber and hybrid threats. Madam President, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for joining me from Croatia today.
Thank you for your invitation. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Your Excellency, your distinguished career has been marked by many significant firsts, including your appointment in 2011 as NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, a role at the very heart of global security dialogue. And tell me, what moments really tested you the most during that time, and how did they shape the leader and indeed the president you went on to become?
First of all, it was never my intention to become one of the first in any area. I just believe it was the situation that required my positive answer, just saying yes to a certain request. And my life, my career, when I look back at it, it's never been linear. There were always moments of ups and downs. There were waiting spaces, etc. And every single experience contributed to what I am and who I am today. And I'm very happy to be sharing my own experiences. And I hope that, Rebecca, one of the lessons that comes out of our conversation today is that leadership does not mean that you have to be fearless. Leadership means that courage is not absence of fear, that you embrace the situation, but that you also prepare for it and do your best in order to handle it. So one of the experiences when I was the first was at NATO, which is a heavily male domain arena, and where I was the first woman ever, not just as Assistant Secretary General, but also the first woman in senior civilian leadership at NATO. So obviously you feel huge responsibility for the path that you're making, not just for NATO and yourself, but also for everyone that hopefully will follow you in those footsteps. There were so many challenging situations, and I think that the biggest challenge that you get in any opportunity in life, in everything that you do, is that you get responsibility without full control. And that is something that you have to manage. So if I have to single out my experiences from NATO, it would be, first of all, in those times from 2011 to 2014, explaining to skeptical publics what is the purpose of NATO, because everybody thought that it was an outdated Cold War mechanism that we did not need any longer. In those times, I also had to explain what we were doing in Afghanistan. And that is very, very close to my heart, because I believed in that operation well beyond the military aspects. I really believed in providing opportunities to everyone, every single individual, especially girls and women, at a better life, and a life of opportunities where they make decisions for themselves. Then what I learned is that every war or every crisis begins with a crisis of meaning, because before it becomes a crisis of territory or an armed conflict, that communications precede combat, and that we have to be very careful about sending the right messages. I think calm before volume is one of the greatest lessons, but also trust your instincts. However, always come prepared. Preparation beats improvisation in any situation.
Your Excellency, leadership journeys are sometimes described as being more like labyrinths than ladders. Does that resonate with your experience? And in moments of transition or complexity throughout your career, what did they teach you about strategy and navigating power structures?
Well, it's actually both glass ceilings and both glass labyrinths, because sometimes you're pushing that ceiling by becoming the first woman in a certain field, especially when it comes to security and geopolitics, which are traditionally male dominated domains. But then you navigate glass labyrinths as you need to go horizontally and prove your own worth, and prove that you're equally competent as a person, regardless of your gender, regardless of your background. So for me, the defining moments was obviously transitioning from diplomacy, career diplomacy, to politics. Probably one of the biggest transitions in my life was when I was asked to run for president. And that moment also signified running for president outside, as an outsider within your own party structures, which means that I not just came from Brussels back to Croatia, but really I did not hold any functions or any connections or any interest groups within the party. And then navigating that ecosystem that had been male dominated, without confrontation, with poise, sometimes with a little bit of sarcasm disguised as humor. I do believe in the power of motivational statements, and especially people who motivate you in particular. So I have these shirts, t-shirts, and socks that come with messages. One of them is "Don't follow in my footsteps, I run into walls," which is a humorous reflection on mostly my presidential term in office. But also there is another shirt that says "Life is tough, but I am tougher." Or with Ruth Ginsburg, the late uh, Justice of the Supreme Court, said, "Never underestimate the power of a girl with a book." So these motivational statements are, I think, very important. And what we do personally to motivate other people also matters. Um, what I have learned from all that is, again, not every battle is worth or deserves your energy. As I said, sometimes you have to hit pause if public debate becomes counterproductive. It's better to stop it, to reset, to take some time and restart it when the public has sort of settled into neutral mode, especially if it had gone in the wrong direction. And for me, for instance, that was often the debate on women's rights, or on any type of equality in Croatia that would go in the wrong direction. So early in my life, I thought that all that matters is hard work and effort. But then throughout my career later, I realized that understanding power dynamics is not manipulation, it's survival. And it's actually key to succeeding in carrying out the responsibilities that you have while in office.
Your NATO role focused, as we've been saying, on public diplomacy, essentially strategic communications at scale. During your time there, how did NATO's understanding of cyber threats evolve? And in today's algorithm-driven information environment, how should leaders rethink public diplomacy?
So during my tenure at NATO, which was from 2011 to 2014, cyberspace was still viewed as a technical dimension, a technical domain. But then we were seeing a lot of shifts that it actually became part of hybrid warfare. For instance, Ukraine, it's obviously the clearest example, but in our own countries as well. So we saw shifts from IT security to national security, from isolated attacks to systemic hybrid warfare, from hackers to state-sponsored operations. And today, cyberspace is defined as one of the domains, in addition to air, land, sea, water, and actual space. Cyberspace is one of the operational domains. And as a matter of fact, in the meantime, NATO has defined that cyber operations can fall under Article 5, which is collective defense. So we really move from asking from who hacked us to asking who is strategically shaping our society through cyber action, which goes not just from cyber attacks, but disinformation, etc. I think what we need is interpreters or translators between leaders and the industry or the technical segment, because we need to all work together. But leaders often lack the technical knowledge, the understanding of the technical means. So leaders need to understand the platforms, not just speeches. But also, the industry needs to understand geopolitics. That is crucial. We need to combine those two elements. And now I want to say something that I really wanted to say out loud for years and years, ever since I arrived at NATO. There was always this battle between public diplomacy and the spokesperson, public relations, etc. I have to say that public diplomacy and strategic communications is not public relations. It's not day-to-day messaging. We need to be strategic about it. We need to define that space, which is very difficult today. The information space has become democratized in the sense that everybody can contribute to it and everybody can access any news with a click of a button or a key on your keyboard. But on the other hand, all sorts of false information, misinformation can be disseminated. And again, if you don't occupy that information space, somebody else will. So we need to be strategic about it.
In 2015, as Croatia's first woman and youngest elected president, you assumed both the symbolic weight and the constitutional responsibility of the position. My question to you is, when did you feel that tension most acutely? And how did you balance expectations and day-to-day governance with what was realistically possible to deliver?
Rebecca, I felt that tension every single day. I'd say every single moment of my life. Because in Croatia, the president is the top directly elected, the highest directly elected official. And the public has huge expectations of you. People think that you can do anything that you want. And I had huge expectations of myself and of what I was going to do. And probably that was my worst nightmare, my worst problem, because I felt I did not live up to my own expectations. However, those are the limitations of power that in Croatia, you're limited by the constitution. So the president, again, even though the highest elected office does not have much executive power, it lies with the government. And there were so many things that I wanted to do, that I wanted to change in Croatia. Modernizing society, from our education system to the way that we think, the way that we do business, the way that we present ourselves to the world. But every single attempt actually depended on the government and cooperation from the government. And governments often have different priorities. But the biggest tensions, I think, came first was our election period. And through the 5 years that I was in office, I had 3 changes of government, so 3 elections. And the first election in 2015 was really, it was very, very close. So there was no clear winner, and coalitions or potential results kept shifting from one side to another. So what I had to do is, well, first, when you become president, you become nonpartisan. So obviously, I was not a member of HDZ, of my party, any longer. So what I did is that I put together an informal, let's call it think tank. I actually called all the constitutional lawyers from Croatia, from different geographical regions and from different ideological backgrounds. And I asked for their advice. And I asked them, what do I do at this point? And then ultimately, the decision that I had to take about the government formation, because they were able to prove that they had a majority in the parliament, did not align with what I thought would be best for the country. However, this is something that I had to do because it was my constitutional responsibility to protect the Constitution, to enforce the Constitution, and to protect the stability of institutions. Now, to get a little bit on the international scene. During 2015, 2016, when I came into office, you remember the migration crisis. And at the time, I was often misinterpreted as as someone who was against migration, which is absolutely not true because migrations are just part of reality today, part of our history. What I was speaking against was against chaos, against absence of regulation. And I was telling everyone, okay, we are actually letting through these persons, mostly men of younger age, who are physically capable of making the journey and who have the financial means to get to our countries. And in that way, unfortunately, we were supporting also human trafficking networks or those who were supporting migrations illegally. But what about those who are left behind? What about women? What about children? And then I asked the crucial question, what happens when we close the gates? Because I knew that was going to happen. We just did not have the physical capability of absorbing the migration waves. The result was that when Afghanistan fell apart in 2021, then suddenly we said no more immigration when most Afghan citizens became legible for asylum in our country. So, in a way, I sort of interpret it as a Western or I don't know, liberal hypocrisy when we were saying, okay, we're letting these migrants in, but we were not resolving the problems that were at the heart or the cause of migrations, which was instability, which was extremism, terrorism, poverty, lack of education. And then just going a little bit back to the domestic scene, when there were these polarized discussions, such as on education in Croatia, on the reform of education, I had to act as a bridge. I had no executive powers to nominate someone or a group of people to be in charge of the reform of our education. But I had to bring the opposing poles together to my office and tell them, okay, I'm going to be sitting today with you until the end of the day. We're going to be sitting here for weeks or months until you find some kind of a common language, some kind of a common way to proceed forward so that not only the reform of the education continues, but really we get rid of the polarization of society on things that I do believe are existential, such as education.
We have an audience question for you now, Your Excellency. They ask, in moments of national security crisis and uncertainty, what frameworks did you rely upon to make critical decisions?
First of all is my inner moral compass. That is a result of all of my life experiences from growing up in the suburbs, the small town in the former Yugoslavia under communism, and then the war in Croatia, the war in Afghanistan, where the country that is very close to my heart, that's really gotten under my skin, as you would say. I've been to Afghanistan 13 times in different capacities from 2006 to 2018, last time as president. So many lessons learned. Today, I travel to Ukraine and experience that war firsthand. And then, just looking at what happens to you and people around you, learning strategic empathy, which I believe is a very important aspect of what we do. Second, the Constitution and institutional responsibilities. That's what I always kept in mind, but that's kind of interchangeable. And the third that I would say that I dare say is my faith. I am Catholic by denomination, but I don't believe that God has a denomination. I do believe in this moral or ethical responsibility that we all share as different communities, different religions, or different parts of the world geographically. But there are values that bind us together. And when you believe that your faith in that sense is not political, it is really grounding. It reminds you that your leadership is actually service, and the service of people in the case of being a president. So these are all very important aspects. And then, of course, it's scenario planning. You go through different options of how things are going to work out. What I would say, what I would tell everyone, pause and reflect. Take that pause sometimes, and unless you have to take an immediate decision, it's best just to sleep it over.
GCF research highlights a persistent global skills gap in cybersecurity. So I'm keen to know, what concrete actions should policymakers and industry leaders take to encourage and channel more women from STEM education into careers and leadership roles, indeed, in cybersecurity and technology?
GCF is one of those organizations that brings everybody together in order to think of the solutions, not just for the problems that we have, but on the way forward, how to overcome the challenges. Because bringing women in it's not a gender issue, it's an existential issue. This is where STEM comes crucial. When I look at Croatia and many countries, and let's look at PISA testing. It's girls who outperform boys in literacy and math, for instance. But when you look at digital literacy, they lag far behind boys. Why is it? It comes from many different angles, from the family to the community, to the school system, to even what we believe sometimes is benevolent advice. If I look at myself, and if I look at the biggest influences in my life, I was born as a girl to a father who wanted a boy, who was a typical Croatian patriarchal man who wanted to see an heir to his little throne. He had his own little private business under communism, which was very difficult. So when he got a girl, he was a little bit disappointed, but then he decided to make the best of what he had. So he taught me many skills that many people define are boys or male dominated skills that helped me later in life. I grew up with boys, and I realized that I could outperform them at many physical functions, not just intellectual. So instilling that ambition and self-confidence is the priority for the whole of society, from families, from parents to governments. And then encouraging girls to take STEM education. My daughter, for instance, graduated from Harvard in chemistry and molecular and cellular biology. But when I look at girls in Croatia, most of the advice that they receive is, why would you want to go into STEM? Why don't you go into teaching or another profession where there are more women, so it's not going to be difficult for you? Yes, it's going to be very difficult. Being a first is such a lonely place, especially when you're the first in a position up there on the hill. But it's absolutely necessary to make room for the rest. And this is what government should be doing, really encouraging STEM education for everyone, for girls, and also for children of lower socioeconomical background who don't have access to high-speed internet or electronic devices or anything. I really, if I were prime minister, I would, my first investment would be into devices for every single school kid in Croatia, beginning from preschool, from kindergarten ages on. Second is giving scholarships for public service. Scholarships, if you go through STEM and cybersecurity education, that you're guaranteed a job and that you have to take that job in the public service so that we actually put that money to good use and that we create new talent. And also the visibility of female role models, because you cannot be what you cannot see. You have to see other women out there in order to say that's possible for me. What I loved about one of the aspects in Croatia when I was president, I was always amazed. And I always said, if my voters were kids in preschool and kindergarten and in elementary school, I would get like 90% of the vote. I don't know why it was. Maybe because I was a mother who could relate to them. And I really, when I would come and read to them, I would sit down on the floor and I was like a rock star. They were asking for my autographs, etc. And I've told them, look, if I could have made it a butcher's daughter from a communist Yugoslavia to become president of a country and everything else that I've done, then anyone can do it, provided you put in hard work and effort, but also provided that you have the support of people around you. If you don't have the support of your family, it has to be the community, it has to be the school system, the state system. Now, when we come to the industry, the responsibility is equally important because sponsorship is equally important as mentorship, sometimes even more important, that you sponsor girls in different areas or socioeconomically disadvantaged kids, that you actually give them the means to be able to create something. Then flexible leadership tracks. And I always tell my colleagues in cybersecurity or artificial intelligence companies, if you're sitting at the board table and you look around you and you see just men, if your boardroom looks like a room of clones, then you're embedding not just gender inequality into the system, but you're lagging behind the true progress. Because in order to be successful as a person, you have to put your brain and your body to full use. But that also goes for the whole of society. So diversity in cybersecurity is not just a social policy. It's not just risk management. It's the key to succeed and to move forward.
Your Excellency, I have another audience question for you here. This person writes, politics, much like defence and cybersecurity, remain largely male-dominated spaces. In the highly polarised environments in which you have worked, what's your best advice for staying on course and maintaining your conviction when challenged or underestimated?
There were really so many moments in my life and career when I was underestimated. Beginning from when I was a kid, a girl playing football or soccer with boys, or in high school because of my geographical or gender background, or in the world arena because I came from Croatia, which is not a big country geographically or in the size of population, but I never believed in those constraints. I always believe that you are what you do of yourself. So when I was underestimated for all of those aspects, I just let my performance speak for itself.
Your Excellency, against the backdrop of AI, now increasingly embedded in defence, political systems and governance, what ethical guardrails must leaders insist upon today, in your opinion?
First of all, of course, it's regulating the artificial intelligence space internationally and getting over or across our potential ideological constraints or limitations, and making it human-centric. Humans have to be responsible for every single decision. So we need to have human oversight of lethal systems, of any autonomous vehicles, of any artificial intelligence systems, because we need that accountability. We need those international norms before we get into a crisis when it comes to artificial intelligence or technological development. Because if we automate those decisions, making in war without accountability, without human accountability, we risk accelerating conflicts beyond human control. And then we really don't know what happens. So keeping that human control and accountability over the whole process, I believe, is crucial.
Your Excellency, let's now shift our focus to social media, which has fundamentally changed the way many heads of state communicate. What do you see as the key risks, but also potential opportunities of this more direct-to-public model of leadership?
Myself, I'm still kind of a 20th century person. I do maintain social media, but I don't publish a lot. And in particular, I shield myself from many of the comments that are generated by bots or trolls that are aimed at destabilizing you as a leader or as a person. It goes down to all levels, to even the digital presence of our children in that space. It does democratize the space. It does allow for people to send you direct questions and comments to what you're doing. It's a way to humanize leadership in order to be able to keep in touch with your voters or with your constituency. I used to do that through traveling all over Croatia, which was physically exhausting. So I would suppose that social media does provide an advantage. Although, again, I do believe that human touch and human contact needs to be maintained. I do see problems and challenges in oversimplification of everything, especially with the younger generations, where algorithms dictate their preferences and choices, even the span of attention through the videos that the young generations are being served through different social media. And they're not interested in anything that goes beyond 30 seconds or more, which I think it's very detrimental even for mental health, let alone for civic responsibility. And then it's also an issue for reactive governments rather than proactive and emotional politics. And emotion and politics are not necessarily bad. On the contrary, I think that the public today, that are voters or people who we're responsible for, want to see human emotion, especially empathy, especially that you express emotions towards suffering or in your own country or in other parts of the world, that it's part of your decision, the human concern. However, you cannot let emotions dictate politics. As I said, preparation is very important, and credibility is built actually in calm periods where you can actually think clearly and think strategically. And I've seen way too many politicians who just engage in individual battles over their social media.
What you were saying about maintaining a calm, rational mindset leads nicely into this next audience question. This person asks, what habits or disciplines have helped you maintain composure under such intense public scrutiny?
First of all, it was physical discipline. For me, sports was always a very important part of my life. Sometimes you just, when you feel frustrated, just get on your treadmill or get out and start running. Then preparation is incredibly important, especially when you go into very important meetings. Yes, sometimes you can improvise and it works out for you, but if you can, you really have to take that time for prepare. And this is what I did in my conversations with the leaders in the United States, in Russia at the time, in the European Union, at NATO, etc. And when you're able to respond to all the questions and arguments in a controlled and systematic manner that involves substance and information that you have gathered through preparation and the arguments that you have prepared, it really disarms the other side. You need to have a private life outside of politics, which means keeping your group of friends, which means having cookouts or whatever activities you have with your friends. In my case, it was also adopting a dog from a shelter and taking her for long walks. She was not able to respond to me verbally, but she responded emotionally, and she could feel my emotions, and she could feel when I was down. And pets are really a wonderful aspect of your life, just like friends. And one piece of advice for me, resilience is something that you build through time. So look at resilience as a muscle that you build.
We've explored a range of leadership skills in our conversation today. Which do you believe is the single most undervalued?
I think it's empathy. And by that, I don't mean what people perceive empathy as your weakness, as, looking at other people's feelings or positions to shape you. On the other hand, what I'm talking about is actually strategic empathy. which is not exactly kindness, although kindness is a very welcome element both in interpersonal and interstate relations. But strategic empathy actually means clarity. Strategic empathy means that you must understand how your counterpart sees the world, what shapes their opinions, what shapes their fears, their ambitions, their constraints. It does not mean that you agree with them. It does not mean that you excuse them for that behavior, but it actually means that you're able to anticipate that behavior and be able to prepare your own reaction or your own policies. So going through a different policy scenarios.
Your Excellency, in terms of meaningful mentorship, what does it look like in practice for you, and whose guidance or lessons have stayed with you the most?
It's really my parents that made it possible for me to be where I am today, or everything that I have done so far. And it's the environment that shapes you in both the positive and the negative ways. I learned from the communist system in the former Yugoslavia about the limitations. I learned from my experience as a foreign exchange student in the United States, where I came prejudiced that people would reject me just because I came from a communist system. And then I realized, no, it really depended on me individually, on the way that I performed and on my own attitude towards my community and the way that I was willing to be part of that community. Then, of course, the leadership environment from Croatia to NATO to the international um, scene. Then, you learn a lot from your bosses, both good and bad. I would even dare say that you learn more from those who made mistakes and who were bad bosses, because those were sort of clarifying situations. So we can equally learn from the good and the bad. You learn even from your political opponents, from how successful they are in order to alter the reality, to sometimes even come up with fake news that will, I won't say destroy, but certainly make your position more difficult in the domestic scene or internationally, that you have to deal with. So when you talk about mentorship, it's not just telling people about your own experiences, is really sharing honest feedback from all of them. It's exposure to responsibility and defining that responsibility. You have to listen to them, to their ambitions. You have to recognize their qualities and then really work towards making it possible for them to realize those ambitions, which is very, very difficult. Real mentorship is not protection from harm or protection from gender inequality. Real mentorship is actually preparation of those girls or boys for what is going to come, because what is going to come is ups and downs. And what is going to come is a lot of people who are going to try to persuade you to get out of there. And, you could have a more comfortable life out there. Again, it's very lonely on top. It's very, very difficult to be the first one, but it's necessary because you have to be the person who paves the way for others to follow you. So as I look at what I want to leave as my legacy, is not just mine having been president of Croatia or any other office that I held. I want to have as my legacy ambition and encouragement to all the girls and all the boys in this world to be able to believe and to have the kind of support that they need to realize those dreams and to come as close to them as possible, accepting all the ups and downs and the waiting spaces as part of the whole process, as part of the learning experience, as part of that leadership, but never losing sight, not just of the vision, but of the values that you hold dear.
We have time for just one more audience question, and thank you, by the way, to everybody who has sent their contributions to us. Please do continue to reach out across our Cyber Leadership Launchpad platforms. We always love hearing from you. This viewer would like to know, Your Excellency, which hard truths do you think young women embarking upon careers in public service or cybersecurity really need to hear?
It's not going to be easy. It's not always going to be fair most of the time, especially when it comes to young girls. You will need to put a lot more effort than your male counterparts in order to prove that you're equally valuable as an employee or as a leader. But you have to accept that reality and move on. Sports is a really good metaphor for that. When you're down, you get up, you dust yourself off, you look at what you've done and you proceed forward. Second, networks are built deliberately. So seek people who will help you, men or women, in all walks of life in order to be able to achieve your goals. And resilience must be built. I do believe in the power of motivational statements, and a quotation from Fernando Pessoa, a great Portuguese writer: "Valeu a pena, tudo vale a pena, se a alma não é pequena." The literal translation is, was it worth it? Was it worth the pain? Everything is worth it, or everything is worth the pain if your soul is not too small, which means that there will be pain, physical, emotional, social, in any way, that you have to go beyond it. You have to embrace it and build it. It's a motivational message, but it's also harsh truth about life that yes, there will be moments that are going to make you suffer, but from my own experience, without those moments that make you suffer, you're not able to fully appreciate the moments where you have a true and actual opportunity, not just to make your own life better, but to make a difference for your whole community and your whole society.
Madam President, you're a big believer in the power of a quote, a good book, or indeed a song as mental resets or sources of daily inspiration. You referenced at the top of our conversation a quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Supreme Court Justice. She said, "Never underestimate the power of a girl with a good book." So in that spirit, it would be remiss of me not to ask, what is a book that has stayed with you? What would you encourage others to pick up?
There are so many inspirational books, and I have to tell you that one of the things that I put forth for myself and my husband as well as parents is to instill that reading habit with our kids. So we were those parents that did not have to push our kids to read. On the other hand, we have to break into their rooms at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because they were still reading a book and they had to go to sleep. So reading books is such a wonderful way to not just relax, not just to learn, but to build your confidence and to build your values. And one of the books that I will treasure and value throughout my life is one of the simplest books of all, and that is The Little Prince, where you learn that yes, maybe there's so many roses in the world, but you have one that is special because you treasure it. And also, I love Dr. Seuss. I was a very active mother who was reading to my kids before they were even born. So one of my favorite books is also Oh, the Places You'll Go. It's a book for children, but it's such a wonderful book about life. And if you haven't read it, please do read it, because it talks about these ups and downs and the waiting places or spaces that I mentioned. Whenever I go visit a school, I always give them a copy of that book because it gives you courage. It gives you that self-assurance. It gives you confidence that you can go through life knowing that there will be difficulties, that there will be opportunities, but will you succeed? Yes, you will indeed. And please remember that there are people out there like me, like many other women and men in this world, who are doing everything that we can in order to make it possible for you.
Such encouraging words to end a very inspiring conversation here today. Madam President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was such a pleasure, and I hope that our listeners and viewers will take out some messages that will be helpful to them in their lives.
Well, that wraps up another episode in the Cyber Leadership Launchpad series. Thank you very much for watching and for sending through your questions for my special guest today. Please continue to follow us online across our platforms and tune in again soon for another mentoring masterclass. Take care, and I'll see you then.